At this time, I'll turn the call over to your host for today's broadcast, our Vice President of Marketing, Scott McLeod.
Thanks, Joelle, and hello again, everyone, and welcome to our broadcast. I'd like to thank you for joining us today for a timely discussion and Q&A on the latest guidance and recommendations for preparing for CMMC certification. Before we get going, for those of you that may not be familiar with your host of today's webinar, I'd like to provide a quick introduction. Here at Apptega, we're helping DoD primes and subs of all sizes prepare for CMMC certification. Our software platform provides easy-to-use questionnaire-based assessments, along with task management and automated workflow for managing remediation of gaps. Dashboards provide instant visibility into CMMC readiness, and automated reports include a POAM report and the data needed for your system security plans. So I'd like to remind everybody to submit your questions at any time using the panel on the right side of your screen. And if that panel becomes minimized, you should be able to expand it very easily. And please submit your questions all along through the discussion. We're expecting a lot of questions today, and we hope to leave plenty of time to take as many questions as possible. So for today's discussion, we've got two great guest speakers lined up. First up, we have Ben Shubinay, who is one of the board members and chair of the training committee of the CMMC accreditation body. And Ben, would you like to provide a quick introduction of yourself?
Hi guys, this is Ben. Thank you, Scott. I'm glad to be here. Hopefully we can provide a lot of great information to the audience. I've been in the learning industry for, professional learning, about 30 years now. And beyond that, kind of an entrepreneur, got involved with the AB in December, and it's been a crazy ride since then. So, and we're looking forward to providing and achieving a lot in the next few months to the DIB. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ben. Next up, you can see on your screen next to Ben is Thad Wellen, who is the Senior Lead Cybersecurity Analyst and CMMC Lead for SecureStrux. Thad, can you provide a quick introduction?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar. I am Thad Wellen. I've been with SecureStrux going on 7 months now. Like you said, I'm the CMMC lead. And I have a background in cybersecurity and information assurance for the last 20 years now. I spent 24 years in the Air Force, retired in 2014. And then I love sharing and providing insight to making sure that people have secure networks.
Great, thanks, Thad. We are very happy to have both of you with us today for this discussion. So before we move into the discussion, I'd like to ask the audience to participate in a quick polling question to set the stage for our panelists. And you should see that question on your screen right now. And it simply says, which best describes your organization? And we'll ask that you check all that apply. So check A if you're an organization seeking certification as a prime contractor. You might also be an organization seeking certification as a sub. C, if you're an RPO or a consultant. D, if you're a third-party assessor organization or intend to be. And E, if you're a licensed partner, publisher, or training provider. And we'll pause just a moment to let you enter your responses. Great, thank you very much everyone for your input, and you should see the results on the screen. Wow, so it looks like almost 60% of today's attendees are primes, almost 2/3 are subs. We have about a quarter of the attendees are either RPOs or consultants, about 12% planning to or are C3PAOs, and it looks like we don't have any publisher or training partners on the or providers on the webcast today. So thank you very much for your input there, everyone. Let's move on now, and I'll turn this over to Thad for some background information related to CMMC.
So, like I said, good afternoon, everyone. Again, what we want to do is start off by just doing a quick overview of CUI. That seems to be a common concern and question every time I have a discussion with a client is just understanding. So CUI was basically born out of the fact that agencies and services had different ways of managing sensitive unclassified information. So it is regulated by the Information Security Oversight Office that is part of the National Archives. It was established in 2016 with an executive order from President Barack Obama. And then commonly for most folks, it's contractually obligated through the DFARS Clause 252, 204, 7012. So what is CUI, commonly known as either CUI or CUI? And it's basically information that requires safeguarding and dissemination that's consistent with a law, regulation, or government policy. So there are two types of CUI, basic and specified. A couple examples of specified CUI would be controlled technical information and what's commonly known as ITAR, International Traffic and Arms Regulations. So those are a couple of examples of specified, and we'll talk more about those in the next couple slides. But CUI can be either electronic information stored on a PC, it can be a printed document, it can actually be a part. So it can be a board, or it could be an image of that board, and then you have to make sure that you have the proper protections. There are currently 24 categories of CUI, 92 subcategories, and 110 types. And that's all in the CUI registry. And if CUI, as far as the government, if what they want to protect does not fall into one of those categories or types, they can go through the CUI registry to add another category, subcategory, and type. We're going to provide some links to some great training that's available from the National Archive, and we'll send that out to everybody and make that available to everybody after the presentation. So what is FCI? FCI is federal contract information. It's information that's not intended for public release, but doesn't meet the level of CUI as far as protections are required. This is where CMMC level 1 starts. If you have FCI, you should be preparing to at least meet CMMC level 1. The contractual obligation right now is typically the FAR Clause 52.204-21. And once again, so here are some examples of what FCI is, but it basically comes down to contract information that should not be public released, but doesn't meet the same levels and requirements of protection as far as CUI goes. So what is CTI, controlled technical information? For us in the DoD world that are working on DoD contracts, this is the 90% of what we're going to be dealing with. This is one of those specified categories of CUI that has to do with military and space applications, and then all the levels of protection that are required. So as far as CUI goes, the basic level of protection as far as CMMC is going to be level 3, and that is basically the same thing plus 20 additional controls that you're supposed to be doing right now, because you have that contractual obligation of the DFARS Clause 252.204-7012, and it dictates that you should be following NIST 800-171 and have that implemented, or at least the start and a POAM for all the controls that you're not currently compliant with. So once again, CTI is one of those military categories, and this is what us in the DoD will be dealing with a majority of the time. Some of the other stuff that we might be dealing with is export controlled, and I mentioned ITAR. ITAR falls in the export control category. So there are additional protections that are required for export controlled ITAR data. Of course, it must be labeled and identified. Any aspect of the export controlled product or or technical data that's used to produce that. And in order to release this to anybody who's not either a U.S. person, which U.S. person is defined as a legal resident of the U.S. or a U.S. citizen, then you would need an export license from the Department of State. So there's additional protections for export control data. That also means that the data can't live outside the U.S. without an export control. So if you had ITAR data, you can't travel overseas with it unless you have an export license. Please, if you have ITAR, get with your export control officer and fully understand the implications of maintaining and managing export controlled data, because there are fines and there is actually people have gone to jail for blatantly ignoring the rules and not handling export control in the manner it should. So that was a quick overview of CUI, FCI, and some of the specified categories that us in the DoD world are going to be dealing with the most of the time as far as CUI. We're going to provide these references and links after the briefing, and that's my quick overview of CUI, and we'll go ahead and jump into the rest of the presentation.
Great, Thad. Thank you very much for that quick introduction there as we transition into the discussion. As we do that, we'd like to ask the audience to participate in one more polling question. You should see it on your screen now. Before we asked you what you do, now we're curious to know how large your organization is. Please just select one answer this time. So A, if you're under 50 employees, B, if it's 50 to 100, C, if it's 101 to 250 employees, D, 251 to 500, or E, if you're over 500 employees. And again, we'll pause just a moment to let you get your answers in. Great, thank you again, everyone, for your participation. So it looks like about a third of you are under 50, 16% in that 50 to 100 band, almost a quarter in the 100 to 250 band, and then an even 16% for both 250 to 500 and over 500. So it looks like we've got a pretty good mix of organization sizes here, which I don't think is going to be a surprise to anybody. So with that, thank you, and Thad, we'll pass it back to you to get the discussion going.
All right, so I'm going to toss this up to Ben for the first question. And Ben, what's going on with current timelines, and what updates can you tell us what's coming out of the CMMC AB right now?
Okay. By the way, I'm very jealous that I can't vote. It says panelists can't vote. I keep wanting to push the little thing, and I want to be part of this. Anyway, it's pretty cool. So the one thing I want to tell our audience is that I am a small business owner, and my several businesses that I have are also DoD contractors. So I'm also concerned. Believe it or not, I am also worried about this whole CMMC thing. I really want to be ready when CMMC comes along. Of course, I'm a little on the inside, so I know what's happening, but really on the fact is I'm still facing the same preparation issues that most of you are facing in terms of being ready for CMMC and making sure that I pass my assessment, which is going to be done by a C3PAO. So I have the same concerns about cost, about making sure that we make it before the contract comes due, and so on. So just know that all of us at the AB are also business owners, also involved in the DoD ecosystem, and have the same exact concerns that you do. So we want to make sure that our OSCs are well prepared and that this goes really, really well. We also want to make sure that that we defend our country. That's really the main purpose of this thing, right? That we improve the defense of our nation. So the current things that are happening, many of you are RPO and C3PAO applicants. As most of you should know, The applications have come to us. You've been applying ever since, I think, once we opened up the applications in June. And I want to tell you that we're about to start processing them finally. And so we had to put together a whole lot of infrastructure to be able to process these applications. So you should hear from us like in the next couple of days. So this is really great news for those who have applied as either consulting organizations, that is the RPOs, or as certifying organizations, that is the C3PAOs, or both. You should hear from us in the next few days. The infrastructure is in place. We've moved very, very far in terms of our relationship with the DoD. We signed an MOU, as you all know, back in the spring, early spring, and now we're about to get our contract done. It's really just a few days away as well, and you should hear something from Katie Arrington about that. And so that will give us the necessary legitimacy that we obviously have. It's just the kind of the final step of this to really be able to get going. And so it's just the timing of all this is coming together really well. The other thing that's happening is that we are training our provisional assessors, which means that what we're going to have right now, we have 52 or 53, 51 provisional assessors, and we're going to 73. So by the end of October, we'll have 73 provisional assessors, which means that we'll have assessors out there who will be able to do pilot assessments until rule change goes into effect. And rule change is going to go into effect in hopefully a couple of months based on what we're seeing out of the DoD. And so when that actually happens, then CMMC will hit the streets. And so probably in January, we're going to start seeing assessments for SCORE. And also our formal training program is going to start, whereby C3PAOs will mostly all have started their processing and started to move towards full certification. And our training program will start where publicly anyone will be able to go through the training program and become professionals or assessors. That should start in Q1 of 2021. Anything else you're wondering about that?
Yeah, so that brings up a couple questions for me. I guess the first question is, how long do you expect that provisional program to go on, and what is the milestone that turns it from a provisional program into the full program?
That's a great question, Thad. So how long is it going to go? Basically as long as until the formal program starts. Okay, so that really relates to the second question. Well, when is that? When is that going to happen? What signifies the start of the formal program? And that is the release of the certification exams that we will be providing to the public. So the certified professional, certified assessor level 1, certified assessor level 3, and certified assessor level 5. Well, actually, the first 3 exams are going to be the so we're not going to start with 5 yet, but we're going to do CP, CA1, and CA3, and hopefully those will be released. We're developing them now, so they will be released to the public as soon as maybe March or April. And in that case, all of a sudden, and the training will have started. People will be able to take training as early as January or February, hopefully.
Okay.
So with that, as soon as the exams are out, they'll be able to start taking exams, and then they'll be certified, and they'll be able to start assessments.
So I guess another follow-up question is that, so we're going to do provisional programs, but right now the rule change is not in place. So what is CMMC going to do to address the fact that the rule change isn't in place, but they might actually start going out and doing assessments and certifying?
Correct. So the DoD will decide. We're working very close and diligently with the DoD office that runs CMMC, and we call them the PMO, the CMMC PMO. And what they will do, is they will decide who who will go for score versus as a pilot assessment, right? So as long as rule change is not fully in place, it's really up to them who gets assessed and whether those assessments are for score. And then we will also open up our provisional assessors availability in case there are other companies that want to get assessed initially.
Okay. Has CMMC AB dealt with a prioritization of who's going to be able to get assessed first, and how are they managing that?
Right. So the DoD PMO is going to tell us how, who gets first priority. Otherwise, once the C3PAOs that the provisional assessors belong to get certified, they will be available to the open market. So the companies that the DoD PMO tells us to go get assessed will need to get assessed first. But beyond that, it's really up to the open market. Now, we very much recognize that the demand is going to be much higher than the availability. Mm-hmm. And when the formal training program begins, we have a very scalable program because we're going to have multiple schools involved in this program. Our certification exams will be available nationwide all of a sudden, and so we will be able to scale very, very quickly in the spring, through late spring and early summer of 2021, so that these numbers increase, exponentially of assessors. So we will have, like any program, we will have an initial wait and a bottleneck. But I'm hoping that through our scalable educational model, that bottleneck will start to get resolved by mid-2021.
All right. Well, thank you for providing the timeline and updates, and we're going to go on to our next section.
All right, folks, we've arrived at our next polling question for you, and we would like to get your input here as well. If you are a DoD prime or sub, and the question is, which CMMC certification levels do you believe you're going to need? And in this case, you can select all that apply, because some of you may be looking to certify at multiple different levels. So A for level 1, B for level 2, C for level 3, D if you're going to be at 4 and or 5, or E if you're just not sure at this point. And again, we'll pause and let you get your responses in. All right, everyone, thank you very much. Interesting here, and maybe not surprising. 13% of you at level 1, only 9% at level 2. I don't think that would be a surprise to anybody. Wow, 77% at level 3, and only 6% 4 or 5, and wow, almost 20% not sure. Thad, Ben, either of you, does that surprise you? You see anything unusual there?
I do see the fact that a majority is looking at level 3, so that tells me that a majority of the folks on the call are either handling CUI or expected to handle CUI. So it does surprise me a little to have the level 3 as high as it is.
Based on the DoD's numbers, and I know your audience is not necessarily representative of the entire DIP, but based on DoD's numbers, they have an assumption that around 70% of the organizations that will be seeking certification, what we call OSCs, are going to be at level 1, right? And only about 25% will be at level 3, and only about 5% will be higher, so 4 or 5. And really, I think that's just a guess, honestly. I don't know how much stock to put into that. That's simply obviously an educated guess by the DoD, and then lots of assumptions in there. I mean, if I were able to do this poll, because as you know, I'm jealous, I can't do it, but if I were able to do it, I'd probably be like, yeah, I'm not sure, or I wish I was level 1, right? Because it'd be a lot cheaper. But obviously, if you know you're dealing with CUI, then obviously the level 3 is the safer path to go. And, most of us are, at least from my perspective, it seems like the DoD wants it to be level 1, but so many of us are dealing with CUI, so many different, as Thad put it, so many different ways that, and I'm sorry, I keep saying CUI. That is not the right way to say it. It is CUI. So do as I say, not as I do. But so if you're handling CUI, you're going to have to be at level 3. So it's important to know that.
Very good. All right. Why don't we pass the controls back over to Thad, and we can continue with the discussion.
Okay, so this exactly leads, that poll question leads exactly into this. How can we ensure the appropriate certification levels are basically the standard that we're looking at, Ben?
So there's 2 ways to do this, right? One is to use your amazing slides that you're going to send out and to figure out, go through and look through all the links and really get educated on the definition of CUI. But even then, let's say, are you at level 3 if you have CUI, or are you going to be at level 4 or 5, right? Maybe hire a consultant, something like that. So kind of do this on your own, one way or another. Try to figure it out. But the other is look at the contracts that you're bidding on. Look at the kind of information that you are managing through, or you will be managing through those contracts. Because the fact is, the process is going to be done through acquisition. The Defense Acquisition University, I'm working with them pretty closely, is getting ready to, and it already has trained some of their acquisitions folks, right? So the contracting officers and so on, about CUI. So really, the acquisitions piece of DoD is going to include, they're going to include in the RFPs and RFIs the required level. That, if you're at level, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, that's, what you need to be at to be able to bid on the contract and win. Obviously not bid, but win, right? So sometimes you might have time between the bidding and the winning, but at award time, you need to have the right level. So that's one way you can know, but of course, a lot of times that's too late, right? The fact is, your organization, if you're like a level 4 or 5, you have the maturity required. You know what that really means in terms of, the organizational maturity, the repeatability, the reporting capacity, of course, policies, processes, all those kinds of things that are required in levels 4 and 5. If you're not sure, you want to either hire a professional to tell you, look into those links, or look at the kinds of contracts that are coming down the line and maybe get together with your contracting officers and see what they're thinking for the renewal. However, again, a lot of them right now might be onshore as well, because this stuff is just getting started. So it could be a bit of an uncertainty right now.
Yeah, so we all know the baseline, if you hold FCI, is going to be at least level 1. And we all know that the baseline for holding CUI is going to be level 3. But what are some of those indicators that would let a contractor know that he needs to either look at level 2 or look at levels 4 and 5?
That's, from my perspective, if you are handling CUI and you've never done a 171 audit or assessment, and you believe that you may be, you may not be ready for a CMMC assessment, try to go for level 2 with the thinking that you're going to get to level 3 as quickly as possible. However, if you're not running CUI, then it makes sense to go to level 2, right? Because you're planning on it. If you don't have CUI and you're planning on doing CUI, that's when you really would want to go to level 2 in preparation for level 3. If you're running CUI, you really want to go for level 3 or above. For level 4 and 5, honestly, I don't have a good answer for you. Maybe you know that.
Yeah. So some of the things that I've seen, of course, it applies to those organizations that are identified for those advanced persistent threats. And that's what 800.171 Bravo, the draft version, is geared towards, those companies that have advanced persistent threats. So the word on the street that I've been hearing in the rumor mill, and some of that is rumor, and we won't really know until, like you said, those RFIs and RFPs come out. But my basic understanding is if you're dealing with if you're building some type of weapon system, so if you're developing the next generation aircraft, if you're developing some type of missile system, then more than likely you're going to fall into one of those categories of 4 and 5. Now, of course, the way the flow downs work and your subcontractors work, the prime might be at level 4 and 5. Maybe half the subs are at level 3, and then the folks that aren't dealing with any CUI or any actual development effort, maybe they're just suppliers in some other form or fashion but have FCI, they might need level 1. And that's kind of the basis that I've been telling my clientele when I have these discussions, and when I'm in forums like this and I'm having discussions. So here's a follow-up question to that. What would you suggest for those prime contractors to make sure that their subcontractors are ready with the appropriate level?
See, that's exactly where, and that's a great question as well. You're really on point here, Thad. The issue is that there's not much guidance out of the DoD at this point about this, right? And here's the problem that a prime could be facing in terms of their sub, and the sub is facing in dealing with their prime right now, in terms of being cyber secure and ready for the CMMC as it comes. And it's a big problem. If you're going to go, if you don't know the kinds of contracts, what level you're as a prime, if you don't know what level your contract is going to be at, so you don't even know your start point, right? Is it going to be a 5? Is it going to be a 4? Is it going to be a 3? So again, a lot of communication with your contracting office, with your current customers and what they're thinking. Do they even know about CMMC as it's coming? What are they thinking when this contract gets renewed? I think a lot of information there. Of course, that's if you already hold a contract and you want to keep it. If others are trying to win a contract, and again, there's a lot of communication that can happen between the contracting office and your organization. So a lot of communication, a lot of questions, asking, because if you ask, that's when they're going to feel the pressure to go out and find out, if they haven't already. If they have no idea about CMMC, this is when they're like, wait a minute, somebody's asking about me. Let me go find out from my superiors. And again, when rule change does occur, and this is typical of DoD, things will take a while to flow down, right? Some offices will jump on it, others will take some time to get into it. And so as a result, your querying them will get them started. So that's number one. Number two is, you don't want to go too high. So what if the contracts you're dealing with are mainly a 3 or at most a 4? Why would you go to a 5? There's now, unless you want to say, you know what, I want to be able to get all my contracts. But if you're a smaller business, any one level, once you get past like 2, any level, it's exponential in terms of the expenses that you're meeting. So you're dealing with, and of course, the organizational maturity that's required to get from, let's say, 3 to 4 or 4 to 5. You might have fewer practices, but you do need to build a lot of maturity into your organization. So my recommendation is really find out the level you need to be at, not try to go for the highest, because now you're spending more money than needed, right? You just have to be just right. And that's the problem. We don't know. The other thing is, what do you do with your subs? Now, the sub may say, okay, well, I need to be able to, win as many contracts as possible from as many primes as possible. So I'm going to try to go for the highest possible. That's great, but you may not be able to regain a lot of those expenses, right? And as charges, as expenses charges to your customer, which is maybe a prime or a higher level sub. or low level sub. So what that means is right now there is very little guidance, and we want to try to avoid the trap of either, trying to go for too high a certification. The problem is you don't want to go too low either. So this is an issue. This is a problem, and we just need to get more guidance out of the DoD. And my recommendation is pressure your contracting officers to give you more guidance, and work with your subcontractors if you're a prime to figure out the right level you should be at, based on as much knowledge as possible you can get out of this, which again, you can hire consultants to help you with this. In terms of the COI, the requirements at level 3, the requirements at level 4, the requirements at level 5, and of course the lower levels, so that you can figure out for yourself what that sweet spot is.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that it's really important to understand where your subs stand currently. So it's a good idea to have those conversations, to make sure that you give them checklists to go through to find out where they really stand. Because the experience is that when you ask an open-ended question, you basically get the answer they're looking for. So if you ask, hey, are you 800-171 compliant right now? And they're like, sure. But when you start getting into the level of detail and asking specific questions on certain components of it, that's when they're like, oh, wait a second, maybe I need to go back and really look to see where I'm at. So it's important for primes to have that conversation with your suppliers to make sure when the time comes that they're ready and they're prepared to be at the appropriate level that they need to be at based on the data they're going to be managing as part of that contract. So that's the only thing I would add.
Right. And I would add to that, that's great observation. What I'm seeing out there when I'm talking to a lot of different companies right now, because I'm running training, but I'm also part of the credentialing committee and many other committees, and I'm involved with a lot of this stuff and talking to the DoD. But a lot of subs right now are dealing with primes that are like, are you ready for CMMC? Prove it, right? And so the sub is like, well, how do I prove it, right? Or the other way around, the sub may not be requested of the prime yet, but they really want to be prepared when the prime comes to them, right? So a lot of times what the prime will do is, first of all, they do need to start a communication and really look at what kind of information is passing back and forth through their subcontract. You really want to look at that, because the kind of information you're sending to your sub and the kind of information your sub is sending back to you, that's the basis of CMMC, right? Is protecting information. So, and protecting data. How is it passed back and forth between you guys? And what level of information is that? What kind of information is it? Is it FCI? Is it COI? Because you might be storing as a prime COI, but your sub might just only be seeing FCI or just some order that has nothing to do with anything. Yeah. Or it could. So you have to be careful about really putting too many constraints on your sub as a prime. That's going to increase your cost, just so you know. So you really want to get the right level, not put too many constraints on your sub. On the other hand, the sub needs to be prepared at the right level. Also be prepared to have the right level of communication with their prime when the prime comes knocking. So the main thing, again, is to get help, is to get support, is to do, if you haven't done one, a 171 assessment, because all of us should have done that. And beyond that, really decide what level you need to be at. The great thing about CMMC is that it's not a one-size-fits-all. So let's take advantage of that. Instead of 171, which was one-size-fits-all. It was too much in some cases and too little in others. So this is what we need to take advantage of. So study up on what CMMC is all about, what CUI is, what FCI is, what each of those levels are, and then decide for yourself, what is the right level that I need to be at? Get a consultant to do a gap analysis and tell you what level you're ready for. And just that documentation alone, because you can't get an assessment right now. You can't get certified right now. You may be able to in 2 months, but then there's going to be a long line, and it might take 6 months to a year for that, what we just talked about, for the bottleneck to kind of ease up. So until then, get a gap analysis and figure out where you are and where you need to be.
Okay, I got one more quick follow-up question to all this. You're a prime, you have subs. your sub, let's just say they do nothing but they're a reseller of strictly COTS products. They won't have any FCI or CUI. What is your recommendation as far as CMMC level for them?
So if you're a COTS, it really, based on the guidance that we see out of DoD, if a product that you sell is the same for private sector as it is for, for anyone, then you don't, CMMC does not fall under that. However, if you have special accommodations, or if you're storing information, then there needs to be a process where you get CMMC certified. And if there's more, I'm sure you can talk through that.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up that point because there is about 350,000 in the defense industry base, and a lot of those are simply selling COTS. So yeah. I wouldn't want someone to go out and rush to say, hey, maybe I need to be CMMC level 3, when all I do is resell a product to the government or resell a product to a prime.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next question. So let's just talk. Maybe this is a joint conversation we need to have. Is getting started with your gap analysis. So as far as the CMMC AB and your perspective, since you have several small companies yourselves, you have lots of conversation with companies. What is your starting point that you want to point companies to getting started with a gap analysis?
Well, I mean, I think, at least for me, I called my IT guy in one of my businesses and I said, hey, we ready for this? And he's like, well, how do you spell CMMC, right? So so I said, okay, well, let me send you some guidance because I have access to the public stuff, none of the private stuff. I'm not going to send him that, but the public stuff. So here's a link to the OSD website, and here's you might want to read through that. Gave him a few days, called him back, and of course he hadn't done a thing, right? So I think that's where we need some help. So I said, okay, go find some organization that can come and help you out. Now, the thing that lucky thing for me is that I also own a company that does that, right? So they do gap analyses and so forth, and they're a cyber company. So I said, call so-and-so from the other company, and they know each other. And so that was my start. But really, honestly, it's important if you have internal people who are cyber people, if you have vendors, MSPs, if you have your own internal and working with external, if you have clients who might be able to help you, a network of people to get out there and get help in figuring out where you are and where you need to be.
Yeah, so the thing I would add to that, so if let's just say I'm company X and I have an IT staff and I might even have a security staff, and maybe I've outsourced some of my security and maybe I've outsourced a little bit of my IT. The first thing I would do is I would identify a point person for CMMC, have them fully understand what the requirements are, have them go through if they're looking at level 3, have them go through an 800-171 internal assessment, actually use the assessment procedures in 800-171 alpha, and actually truly identify where their weaknesses are, and then start putting together a plan to fix that. But I wouldn't stop there. Even if I had a strong IT team, and even if I had a strong security team, I would definitely want to go out and have some an outside look. Take a look at the posture. The advantages of an outside person is there's no influence at all, right? So it's a totally outside person coming to look at your program, but you got to find the right people that are able to do that. So that's my only suggestion is kind of handle it on your own, get to a point where you think you're pretty good, and then when it comes time you're at the point where you're at that 90%, it might be time to look at that third party.
That's a great technical way to say what I said, but you're much better at it than I am.
All right, let's see what's going on with the next question. Oh, poll question.
Yeah, excellent, gentlemen. I think this question follows the last discussion very nicely. So another polling question for the audience. You should see it on your screen. And again, this one is for those participants that are DoD primes or subs. And it simply says, which best describes your approach to preparing for CMMC certification? And in this case, please select all that apply, as you may be using multiple techniques. So A, if you're taking a DIY approach, primarily managing or entirely managing this within your organization. B, if you're mostly turning this over or putting this in the hands of an RPO or another consultant. C, if you're taking a hybrid approach, maybe a combination of DIY plus some external help from an RPO or a consultant. D, if you have not yet started preparing for CMMC certification, but maybe thinking about one of those A, B, or C approaches. And E, if you're just not sure at this point. And again, we'll pause just a moment and let you get your responses in. All right, everyone, thank you for your input. Interestingly enough, it looks like just under half are either taking a DIY approach or hybrid. Only 5% are relying almost entirely on an RPO or a consultant, and a little more than 10% of you have not started yet, and another 10%, it looks like you're not sure at this point. So again, thank you very much for your input. Hopefully that is valuable information following the conversation that Thad and Ben just had. So Thad, we'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so I really like the look of those results, because it means that people are taking a proactive approach and kind of managing this in-house, and then, you know, kind of like we suggested, once they get to a certain point, you know, bring in a consultant, an RPO. So it's actually really good to see numbers like that. The problem with strictly relying on an RPO or a consultant is that a lot of times they're dealing with a blank slate. So if you haven't looked at the controls, you haven't prepared to a certain level, it might be a rough starting point when an RPO or a consultant comes in. All right, let's jump to the next question. Assessing the gaps and preparing for certification assessment. So I think what we're trying to say here is, you know, after we've gone through and we've done an assessment, and we're to the point where we're at that 99%. What is the important thing to do to actually prepare for the actual certification itself?
You know, again, I think the bandwidth here is going to be pretty low at the beginning of 2021. And the DoD, if you're part of a larger contract that comes due, and let's say the contract has the CMMC requirement in it, the DoD may be willing to provide waivers. So we'll see that. I hope that's going to be the case, but we don't have a definitive answer from the DoD as to how they're going to approach that. But it's always important to have proof of an assessment, like not the assessment itself, because you may not be able to get to it early on, but proof of a gap analysis. An external one is always good, but even an internal one, so that if someone comes knocking saying, hey, you need to be at this level, you can say, look, I've had an analysis, and here it is. Can we go for a waiver? Something like that.
So as far as preparing for the certification assessment, can you talk a little bit about the objective evidence that's required to be able to actually get certified?
Right. So when an assessor comes in, they're going to look at artifacts, right? And they're going to be looking and talking to you. They're going to be, you know, they're going to need somebody to talk to. So there's got to be someone either external or contracted by you as an organization that can guide them through your organization and your architecture. And so that you need to have what is it called? An SSP, which is System Security Plan. Is that what it stands for? And then you need to have kind of an architecture, network diagram of some sort. I mean, there's going to be a lot of different documentation required, but you also have, proof. You have to have proof of depending on the level, right? So let's say if you're at level 3, you need to have the policies in place, your processes in place, your plans in place, which is kind of showing, the money that's going into cybersecurity, so the funding, the budget, and the people, the roles, the responsibilities. So a lot of different aspects of documentation that would be required. Assessors have 3 major ways of doing assessments, right? So they're going to interview, right? And actually either, test or observe, right? And so that you're going to have mechanisms available for them, either someone to answer their questions or, ways to show them what you have, or documentation to tell them what you have for each of those practices. So, which is at level 3, you have 130 practices, right? At level 1, you only have 17, and also fewer requirements for documentation. Does that answer the question, Pat?
It does, and I just want to point out that I've actually gone through your RP training, and I must say it was actually pretty intense, and at the same time great. And I think that the thing that kind of was important to understand as a consultant, as an RPO, making sure that folks are ready, is that they have to have basically 2 of the 3 forms of objective evidence for each practice. And the other thing that was just kind of telling to me is, policies and procedures are a huge part of CMMC, especially as you get up into level 3. It starts at level 2, but it's even more so at level 3, and it shows that maturity. But you kind of talk to this point, but it's important that organizations not only fund being able to maintain those practices, but document how they're going to do it in a strategic manner. And that just shows that maturity of an organization, and that's going to be required for level 3. So I just want the folks out there listening in to understand that it's important not only to have a program, but to have it at the mature level when it's time to get certified. And what you can do is start gathering that evidence. You start gathering that artifacts to show that you're doing your audits on a weekly basis, that this is the process for doing creating new accounts, and everything else that goes into all the different practices and processes for the appropriate level that you're looking at.
One thing that's really important there, and your great description kind of made me think of this, is that if you've passed the 171 audit, right, and this is why we call a 171 audit versus a CMMC assessment, right? An audit's kind of a checklist, and it's a technical checklist. Do you have a firewall? Check. Do you have a virus checker? Check. Mm-hmm. Do you have, locks on your door? Check, right? You go through a checklist and you're done. But CMMC is a little different, because maturity in the organization becomes key. And especially at level 3 or above, just having the controls in place isn't going to be enough. It just isn't. And the way that we're training our provisional assessors right now, who are going to be the first ones out there and really set the tone for all the assessors that are come after them, is that just having the controls in place isn't going to be enough. We need to see the maturity. And maturity means repeatable processes following organizationally accepted and approved policies, and that have been occurring for some time. We don't have a specific time frame, but it has to show maturity. So, in a 171 audit, if your auditors came in and they looked at your organization and they said, oh, there's no firewall in place. Let's just, give the obvious example. It's always the firewall, right? And all of a sudden, they're there for a week and they find that there's no firewall on Monday. On Tuesday, the CEO signs the invoice and they put the firewall in place and they configure it. And on Wednesday, they come back and there's a firewall, you pass. That's not going to be the case for CMMC level 3 or above, or even level 2 or above. There needs to be maturity, there needs to be repeatability, and there needs to be proof that whatever is happening has been happening in a repeatable way. So buying the thing during the assessment it's just not going to work, right? And so please keep that in mind, that you need to be prepared and mature.
Yeah, and I think that just highlights the key differences between a 171 audit and what's going to be required for CMMC level 3, is that 171 only required a system security plan and a POEM to basically address the gaps that you currently have. And documentation wasn't required for everything, for all the 171 controls. So that's a huge difference. And like we keep harping on, it is a maturity model. It's not something that you can roll out and produce and then the next day get certified.
That's why we're saying you got to prepare now. Even if you're not going to get assessed for another 2 years, most likely, most of you probably won't get assessed for another 2 years, but you need to prepare now. It's very, very important that you prepare now because you got to show maturity. That's why in CMMC, we don't have controls, we have practices, right? Because we have to show maturity.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's go on to the next question. Common trends.
Or did I thought I saw, there we go.
Oh, I did. Thank you, Ben. And sure, we've kind of talked about this already. We've kind of addressed this. Ensuring readiness and certification of subcontractors. So making sure that your supply chain basically is taken care of. Is there anything else you wanted to add since the discussion that we had earlier?
I think we covered it. You got to communicate with subcontractors, look at the information that's flowing between your two organizations, and try to decide what the right level is. Not too low, not too high. You don't want it to be too expensive, and you don't want it to be obviously high enough, right? So you got to just work together to find that out.
Yeah, and like I said, open communication between you and your subs is key. Making sure that you're having those conversations, so you make sure that when it comes time to go after that next contract a year from now, that your supply chain is going to come with you, because primes can't do this alone. There's a lot of things that are required as far as contracts go, and you have to have those subcontractors with those special identifiers next to their categories. So it's all required in contracts. So you have to make sure that your subcontractors are ready. All right, I think we've talked about this one enough. Let's go on to the next question. Common trends and issues that we found. So I know that you mentioned that you have a company that actually does gap analysis currently. So what kind of trends have you seen so far as when your company's doing gap analysis?
I've been so mired in, and thankfully I have partners who are running the companies, because, by the way, guys, we're supposed to be volunteers. So I've been volunteering like triple full time since January, which means my other companies are kind of doing things on their own. And I've always been really kind of a silent partner anyway. So I have time for that. That's a question for our cyber company CEO. But I would say that based on what I remember from a long time ago, last year, before my life was sucked up by CMMC, the most gap analyses usually will find, it's kind of like the common thread between the certain level of organizations. And usually, we mainly work with financial and medical firms. So it's really more HIPAA compliance and financial regulation compliance and so forth. So it's really not CMMC, and they can't do CMMC right now because of conflict of interest. So I need to stay out of CMMC at this point at least. And my companies do. But really, it's almost the same thing. So I'm going to kind of throw that back to you. In fact.
Yeah. So we've been doing SecureStrux ourselves, and I'm just going to talk about SecureStrux and my experience real quick. So SecureStrux has been doing gap analysis as far as CUI and 800-171 for about 4 years now. And we've done quite a few CMMC gap analysis. And I think that, honestly, if you would have asked me this question before I started doing this, I probably would have said stuff like, multi-factor authentication and some other things. But to be honest with you, that's not the trend at all. There's so many technical implementations for multi-factor authentication that most organizations are doing that, and it's kind of a requirement. It's different than it was 4 or 5 years ago, where that was a big deal that you had multi-factor authentication. But that's definitely not a trend. I think the biggest trend is the simple fact that people don't have documentation and policies and procedures that match the technical implementation. To be honest with you, most of the gap analysis that I've done so far, there's very little documentation at all. So a lot of times they have a good technical implementation, but they don't have a documented process of how they're doing it. So I think that's probably the biggest trend. But and then those other things that are kind of hard to do unless you have a documented process, like fully managing incident response, having those playbooks on how to actually manage an incident, and then change management and configuration management are the other trends that we see. People just don't have, without a documented process, it's really hard to manage change and documenting change in your environment. So those are some of the big trends, and I'm sure you see the same thing, in the healthcare and financial world.
Yeah,
as well.
And look, what is CMMC going to do? What is the true effect of CMMC? Because until now, and we got to be honest with ourselves. Again, I'm a DoD contractor, so I'm going to be honest with myself here, right? DoD has tried all kinds of carrots with us, right? Putting it in the contract, being nice about it. Maybe we'll audit you, and if you don't have what you need, then we'll do a POAM and just try to be better next time. It's kind of like there's really no real effect, right? What they're trying to do now is bring out the stakes, right? So what is it really going to do? Well, it's going to start involving many different organizations all of a sudden, not just cybersecurity, within a company. So what we're talking about is obviously sales and marketing, right? I mean, sales, they want their contracts won, and all of a sudden there's a requirement and you don't have it, and we're not going to be able to win the contract. So sales gets involved. Legal is going to get involved. All of a sudden, there's clauses in that contract that they're actually going to read. Obviously, IT and cyber have always been involved, but they may not have been heard as much, right? Now they get a voice at the table. Finance, cybersecurity has always been, so far, in my experience, and I don't want to speak for all of us on this call, there's 206 people here, but in my experience has been an afterthought. So as a result, budgets are not, this cybersecurity does not get as much of a budget. Now, I'm not talking about those of you that are, building weaponry and so forth, but, most of us OSCs who are really small businesses, it's just an afterthought. So it doesn't end up in the budget as a line item. It's just IT, and then cyber is just going to fall under it, right? Now, this small, medium-sized businesses. So, I'm not talking about Raytheon here, right? But what's going to happen is that, of course, all of this will come up to the executive offices. And all of a sudden, the CEO now is going to become aware of the importance of cybersecurity. And that's the goal. That's what's important. So from my perspective, generally speaking, the biggest gap is, in fact, in the entire strategy of the business does not include cybersecurity. That's the biggest gap. And what CMMC is going to do, hopefully long term, is that it's going to change the culture of the DIB, and maybe as other government departments adopt CMMC, and maybe even local and state governments, then the culture of this country, so that CMMC becomes a line item at legal, at finance, at sales, and at IT and cybersecurity, as well as, of course, at the exec offices.
Yeah, you just highlighted a key point. You know, businesses are in it to make money, and if you can't generate revenue, then you have to either you got options, right? Either spend money to be able to get that revenue, and you know, basically spend money to get yourself CMMC compliant, or you're going to have to, unfortunately, find another line of business to get into, because you know they're gonna draw a line in the sand, and it's going to come down to, if you want to be awarded the contract, you're going to need the appropriate level. So I think you highlight a key point of this is forcing companies to spend money on something that is important to protect their own IP, and to make sure that the warfighter has a technological advantage over our opponents, you know, over the bad guys that we're on the battlefield with.
I mean,
so that's the key.
Yeah, I deal with, you know, P&L statements all the time. That's how I, you know, look at the how my companies are doing. You know, my CEOs will send me their P&L statement, their balance sheet, right? Cybersecurity is not normally a line item in the P&L statement. It could be under IT, or it could be, you know, buried as a sub line item, but not a main line item. What I have a feeling is going to happen is that, you know, along with, you know, office expenses and technology expenses and legal expenses, which are, you know, the high level line items, cybersecurity might get its own high level line item now, because the main gap is the fact that executive leadership, CEO on down, and even the board of an organization do not have cybersecurity as a high enough priority until now. That's the major gap, and that's hopefully going to change.
All right. Well, let's see what we have next.
It looks like we have come to our last polling question before we move on to taking some of the many questions that have been coming in. And real quickly here, you should see on your screen, would you like to learn more about cybersecurity software services from the sponsors? So you can select A if you want to learn more about software from Apptega, B if you'd like to learn more about CMMC preparation services from SecureStrux, C if you're interested, but maybe not right now, such as maybe early next year, or D if you're not interested. And again, we'll pause a moment to let you get your answers in. All right, everyone, thank you for your input there, and thank you for the many questions that have been coming in. And I'd like to remind you, we've got about 20 minutes or so left, so we may have time for most of them, but you can certainly continue to submit those questions as we get into the Q&A. So let's see, looking, and we're gonna, and there's some that have come in too that seem to be very specific to one environment or one individual. We're gonna try to focus on those that seem like they have broad applicability for most of the attendees, because we do have quite a few people on the call. So first one here says, this may be premature, but will you provide formal in-person training on CMMC? I'm assuming this is meant for Ben and the CMMC AB, but not positive.
Right. So the AB is not going to provide. We have the RP training right now that's been through, but that's for consultants. For those who want to be professionals or assessors, CMMC is going to try to get out of the training aspect of it. We're just going to run the exams and the certification program. Training is going to be offered by third parties called licensed training providers, or LTPs. We're going to have a list of those available starting in January, February timeframe when they're going to start providing classes. You can go to our website, cmmcab.org, to find the ones closest to you or the ones that provide classes online.
Great, thank you, Ben. Another one here says, is it true that level 1 certification will require an audit from a C3 PAO?
So when you want to be a certified assessor at level 1, if that's what you're looking for, I'm assuming that's what the question is about, then once you take your training at an LTP and then you pass your exam with us and you get certified, your first assessment needs to be audited by us. And it might be observed by someone at AB, or it might be audited later. So we'll see how that goes. We don't have those processes down yet, but that's just so that we know for sure that your first assessment, if you're going to be an assessor for as a new profession, that it goes well.
Thanks, Ben. Just to be certain, I read that question a little bit differently, in that it might be if you're a DoD contractor or sub and you're planning on a level 1 certification, do you need to be audited by a C3 PAO?
Any kind of CMMC assessment that is going to be for score, and your score ends up in the DoD database so that your acquisitions people check it, those assessments need to be done by a C3 PAO. They can't be done by anyone else.
Very good.
At any level.
That seems like a very black and white situation there.
Oh yeah.
Yep. All right. Let's see. My IT staff is asking if there will be any templates that they will provide and be able to follow.
That's a great question. We don't have any. Your MSSP or your cyber support organization or consulting organization should have templates for you to help you get prepared. We have draft templates, but honestly, those are just draft. We're going to be software agnostic, so hopefully a lot of different applications will be able to plug in with us long term. But until then, it's probably some Word or Excel spreadsheet you can use. But we don't have anything like that right now on our website.
Yeah, so I'll just add to that. So there's no templates, but right off the link from CMMC-AB's website is the link to the acquisitions and where there are not templates, but there is the guidance for CMMC-AB. And then if you go to the NIST 800-171, they actually have a template for a POAM and they have a template for a system security plan. So if you're looking for a template to download and start your process, those are some places you can go to find some templates.
Great answer.
Excellent. Okay, so this may be a multiple part one here. The verbatim question says, how do we read more about what the rule changes are that are not in place yet that you mentioned several times? And Ben, this might also be related to, DFARS being out for public comment right now, I believe.
Right. So Thad, do you have the link for the DFARS? I have it somewhere, but maybe you could share it out later.
Yeah, we'll make sure that the link to the DFARS changes. So the thing that was kind of interesting, I honestly thought they were going to actually rewrite the DFARS clauses and include CMMC language, but what they did is they actually added DFARS. So I think it's DFARS 252-204. I think it's 2017, 2018, and 2019. So they didn't make any changes to the current DFARS clauses, at least what was released last week, I think it was. But what they did is they put out for comment what the DFARS clauses will be. And like I said, we can provide those links to the acquisitions at the SecDef office. for actual the actual true links instead of conjecture that I've seen from different sources.
There's no surprises there, honestly. It's just, here's CMMC, you got to do it.
Yep.
All right, speaking of that, you got to do it. This question is about the government mandating this being done and asking who will manage the variable or the variances and costs amongst the C3PAOs for conducting audits.
So this is a free market system. So as a result, we have a marketplace. We're going to have a marketplace on our website where you can see the names of the C3PAOs and just contact them. That's showing that they're going to have a marketplace on their website. But really, like anything else you buy, you need to shop around. We will not, the AB will not, categorically will not manage pricing for these services. Are you showing that your marketplace there?
No, this isn't ours. This is actually Apptega's. I'm not in control of the slides anymore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is Apptega's marketplace that's on the screen right now. Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Ben mentioned right there, the marketplace is going to show quite a few different things. It'll list the RPOs. It'll list, I believe it'll actually list to the RP level. It'll list the C3PAOs and the certified assessors. It's also what my understanding, and you could chime in to tell me if I'm correct or not, but you guys are going to list like tools. I know the LPTs are already out there. What else are you going to list in your marketplace, Ben?
That's a lot right there.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, the training providers, of course, but it's all going to build up slowly but surely. Hopefully, there's going to be a whole lot more in the next couple of months that we're going to add to the marketplace. But that's where you can find the providers. But then, honestly, Google them, call them, talk to them, see. Again, first 6 months of this, till about June or July, there's not going to be much choice. And so the pricing will probably be more expensive. But as we try to saturate the marketplace with more and more C3PAOs and more assessors, hopefully the pricing will come down.
So yeah, once again, just one quick thing. So there is no requirement for someone that's going to provide the gap analysis to be a registered provider, but or an RPO. But I will say that the training has been excellent. So I appreciate everything that you guys have done for the training. But when it comes down to the auditors, you have to be real careful that you don't just go out to the free market and pick an auditor, that they have to be listed on the CMMC AB website to actually issue a certification to the organization. So it's real important that when you shop around for your C3PAO, that you use the marketplace.
Yeah. And make sure if you find somebody on Google and they say they're a C3PA or they email you, you need to come back and look at our website to make sure that they're there.
Oops, I just muted myself. Very good. Next question simply says, will this affect non-DoD contracts, such as with NSA, Homeland Security, and others?
So based on my information, the other departments are watching closely and are as soon as this becomes successful, they're hoping to adopt it as well. This might take some time though.
Yeah.
So probably 3-4 years away, but maybe sooner, who knows?
Yeah, I will say this. I have seen the GSA STARS 3 contract the RFP was released, and it actually had CMMC language in there. So, I mean, they're already jumping on board before the DoD is on board.
Yeah, and we're like, we're not ready. No one can do this. But
yeah,
so it wouldn't, you're right.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if I absolutely do think that we're not far away, maybe 3 or 4 years away from the entire federal government adopting CMMC or some form of it. But I have a feeling that it's even going to get down to the state and local governments.
Oh yeah, I mean, state and local, I mean, maybe local is a little much, but on the state level, I'm sure the big ones are definitely already looking at it. I know I'm in Maryland, and the AB is you know, headquartered in Maryland, and Maryland's looking at it. But I'm sure California, New York, and Texas, and the other big guys are looking at it as well. And once those guys go, the rest will follow. So pretty quickly. The other thing is, of course, other countries as well. So Canada is watching closely, and they're already in talks with the DoD. We've had conversations with Japan, with the European Union, Singapore, of all. I mean, it's really going to be worldwide very quickly.
Okay, next question here simply says, will the certification assessments be conducted in person or virtually?
So at this point, we are training our provisional assessors to be able to do assessments virtually. We're hoping that once vaccinations start, that we can do in person as well. And so, you know, it all depends on the universe and how things go, right? But we can currently do them virtually, but it's not ideal.
Yeah, and I'll just say, so far, a majority of our, at least the gap analysis in the last, you know, obviously 6 months have been virtually. So I've been a huge proponent of not doing it virtually, that it's best when you're on the ground and you can actually interview people. But in the current environment, we've found ways to do it virtually. So I will say, as far as the gap analysis goes, there's that as well.
Okay, there are several questions related to effort and cost. And I'll read this one here as a proxy for all of them. Basically, it says, what is the typical expense to get to level 3 certification? Is that something you can help them out with some information? There probably isn't typical anything, but
I'll start with this, but I'm sure Thad, as usual, has a much better answer than me. But I'll say this. I mean, look at the number of companies. And by the way, the DoD has come out with several different numbers. I mean, I've seen 290, I've seen 300, I've seen 350,000 companies. I think it's way higher than that, because I don't know if the DoD is looking at all the subs of the subs of the subs of the subs, right? And so when you really put all the numbers together, we're talking about maybe over 500,000, if not higher. And that's just DoD. And then once everybody else joins, you know, the sky's the limit. And these guys are of all shapes and colors. We're talking about a one-person company versus 100,000 company, a person company. We're talking about a single location versus hundreds of locations nationwide. We're talking about small enclaves versus global enclaves. So there's really no typical anything when it comes to CMMC. That's just kind of my observation. And of course, we don't have enough historical information. We have zero historical information to give you a good marker there. Thad, anything that you might be able to add to that? Because that was a bad answer, bud.
No. It's absolutely the same question or the same answer I'm gonna give. It's so subjective. The one thing that I will say, the thing that is really, really hard is being able to get that return on investment when you're that really small company. One of the things that I've kind of suggested, and I've heard this come out of some of the big contractors, is the way they're gonna help out their subs and those small consultants that still need a CMMC certification is that they're going to extend their network to them. So I have heard that happening. I can't point exactly to any company that has done that, but I have a feeling that's going to become more common than we think as of right now, especially when it comes down to that one person consultant that might need access to CUI. It might be best to just be part of the Primes network and figure out how to segment off that person from the rest of the company data. So there's different inventive ways that people are gonna be able to meet the requirements, but do it in a manner where it's not gonna cost it costs you out of being able to do business. So you just gotta, like Ben keeps saying, shop around. find different resources, and then the bottom line is that you got to figure out how you're going to do this if you want to continue doing business with the DoD.
I love the answer because it's going to mean a culture change, as I said. And in that culture change, we're going to have to do things differently. And of course, we're all human beings. We're extremely creative, and we're going to find ways to do them in a way that is compatible with the new atmosphere and environment.
Very good. This one is very closely related to the last one, and I believe a little bit different though. It says, we believe we're in very good shape with NIST 800-171. How long should we expect it to take to prep for a CMMC certification audit?
Depends on what level you're going for, but if you're at level 3, then what we have is 20 Delta practices. If you're good with 171, so that's 110 controls, you're going to have the 20 Delta practices to worry about. But at level 3, remember, you also have the maturity to worry about, the policies, the procedures, the plans, the budgeting, roles and responsibility documents, and showing that you have been following them. So keep all of that in mind. I don't know the size of the company, but so in terms of cost and time, it's very variable. But again, be concerned with those 20 Delta practices and turning those 110 controls into practices, which means policies, procedures, and so forth, maturity.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, that's the perfect answer, Ben. You got the baseline, so you got the technical controls in place if you're meeting 800-171, but you got to make sure those other things are in place. And then, of course, you got to also address those 20 additional controls that are CMMC specific. And then once again, you have to show that you're actually doing this and you're living and breathing the practices in the manner that they need to be managed. So actually, I got nothing really significant to add to Ben's answer.
I made it one time. I had a good answer. I'm glad.
Nice. All right, gentlemen, I think we've got time for a couple more here. And these two I'm looking at right now are kind of related to the relationship between primes and subs. This first one's a two-parter. It says, besides the proactive preparation, that's the timeline that the DoD requires subcontractors to be certified, will uncertified subs impact the prime's CMMC certification?
Most likely, there needs to be, at first, there's going to be, again, some allowance for that. So there's most likely going to be some allowance for that at first, but only very temporarily. So yes, if you're using subcontractors, your assessor is going to long-term want to see proof that your subcontractors, whether through your contract, whether you have added the CMMC requirement in your contract, sometimes the assessor, that's all they want to see, right? And then how you're enforcing it, through what practices, and through what mechanism are you enforcing that? How have you then received proof from your sub that they are at that level? Again, this might take some time to really be able to implement fully.
Yeah, so that brings up a good point, Ben. And as far as CMMC certifications, is that going to be public knowledge who has a certain CMMC certification? How is the process, official process, that either the government can see or that the primes can see if their subcontractors actually have a certification?
So the public, and this is a great question, as things stand today, based on communication I've had with the DoD today, which may change, but this is not public information. The level you're at is not public information. And in fact, when you're enforcing a certain level with your sub, that should not be public information, right? So that, whether you're certified or not is public. What level you're at should not be public. How that's
Gotcha.
enforced, that's going to have to be figured out, I think.
Interesting. Okay, good to know.
Very good. Well, gentlemen, I can't believe 90 minutes has gone by so fast, but we are at the bottom of the hour, believe it or not.
Time flies when you're having fun.
This has been great. I'd like to, on behalf of Apptega and SecureStrux. Ben, like to extend thanks to you for making this time with us today and providing your insights. Yeah, very much appreciated. And Thad, thank you for managing the conversation with Ben. Very well done, and hopefully all the attendees, got a lot out of this hour and a half.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to thank Ben for all of his volunteer hours that he's put towards making this happen, and all the volunteers at the CMMC AB. We in the defense industry base sincerely appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It's worth it. It's the greatest thing I've ever done. It really is. It's exciting. It's fun. It's challenging. It's exhausting, but it's worth it. All I want is for a more secure nation for us all. So we're getting there.
Well,
Awesome.
On those thoughts, yeah, a great way to close out. I would like to also thank everyone for attending with us today. On your way out, there's a short exit survey. We very much like to get your feedback and input for future sessions and other topics that we can provide and making improvements to these as we go. Please give us your candid feedback, and we look forward to meeting with everybody online again in the near future. So everybody have a great, safe afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.